The night my aunt disappeared from Amish country, nobody in my family cried in front of the church. That was the first thing that terrified me. No screaming, no searching, no desperate panic, just silence. Cold, careful, trained silence. And years later, when I finally uncovered the Amish secret they tried hiding from every daughter in our community, I understood exactly why. Because once Amish girls learned the truth about marriage, obedience, and fear, some of them stopped wanting the future prepared for them. My name is Clara. I was 19 years old when I discovered why so many Amish women slowly disappeared emotionally after marriage. And honestly, I think my mother spent years trying to protect me from realizing it too early. People outside Amish country love imagining our lives as peaceful. Horse buggies crossing quiet roads, girls sewing near candlelight, large family dinners, simple living. And yes, sometimes life truly looked beautiful from the outside, but hidden underneath that peaceful image was a secret most Amish daughters only discover after it becomes too late to escape. The first crack appeared during my cousin Miriam's wedding. I still remember the exact feeling sitting inside that crowded farmhouse. Church women carried hot food between tables. Children laughed near snowy windows. Men discussed scripture and farming while lantern light covered the room softly. Everything looked joyful, but Miriam didn't. She sat beside her future husband, looking pale and emotionally distant. Not nervous, terrified. At first, I told myself maybe all brides felt overwhelmed. But then during supper, Miriam accidentally dropped a spoon. The loud sound echoed across the room, and the expression on her husband's face made my stomach tighten instantly. He didn't shout, didn't insult her. Somehow, his silence felt worse. Miriam immediately apologized 3 separate times while her hands visibly shook. Then later that evening, while helping wash dishes near the kitchen, I accidentally overheard 2 older married women whispering quietly near the pantry room. One softly said, "She'll stop crying after the first few months." The other answered, "They all do eventually." Eventually, that word followed Amish women everywhere. You'll adjust eventually. You'll obey eventually. You'll stop questioning eventually. Like unhappiness inside marriage was simply another responsibility women carried quietly. A week after the wedding, I visited Miriam alone for the first time. And honestly, I barely recognized her already. Before marriage, Miriam laughed loudly during church singings. She teased cousins constantly. She talked about dreams and travel and books she secretly wished to read someday. But sitting inside her new farmhouse, she looked emotionally exhausted, smaller somehow. At one point, while her husband worked outside near the barn, Miriam suddenly grabbed my wrist tightly and whispered something that made cold fear move through my chest instantly. Nobody warns Amish daughters what marriage really becomes. My heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, the farmhouse door opened. Her husband returned. And immediately, Miriam became quiet again. That moment changed everything for me. Because suddenly, I started noticing similar fear everywhere. Married women apologizing constantly. Wives checking husbands' faces before speaking openly. Mothers teaching daughters obedience more than confidence. And the strangest part was this. Nobody discussed it directly. Ever. The silence itself became suspicious. Then one evening during supper, my father casually announced church leaders planned arranging new courtship introductions soon for girls my age. The moment he said it, panic hit me unexpectedly. Because suddenly marriage no longer sounded romantic, it sounded dangerous. Later that night, while helping my mother fold laundry near the stove, I finally asked the question haunting me. "Were you happy before marrying, Father?" The towel slipped from her hands instantly, only for a second. But I noticed fear crossed her face too quickly to hide completely. Then she forced a weak smile. "Why ask strange questions?" "Not yes. Never yes." That frightened me deeply. I lowered my voice carefully. "Miriam seems unhappy already." The room went silent. Rain tapped softly against the farmhouse windows while my mother folded towels too carefully beside me. Finally, she whispered something that shattered me completely. "Marriage changes Amish women faster than daughters realize." Changes, not strengthens, not fulfills. Changes. The word made my chest tighten painfully. How? My mother stopped folding laundry entirely, and for one heartbreaking moment, she looked less like my mother and more like a frightened girl, remembering something painful from long ago. Then softly, almost too quietly to hear, she answered, "Because Amish daughters are raised to survive marriage, not understand it." Cold fear spread through my entire body instantly. What does that mean? But my mother suddenly stood from the table. That conversation ends here. The panic in her voice terrified me more than anger would have. Then later that same night, after everyone went upstairs, I quietly came downstairs for water. And that was when I heard my parents arguing softly inside the kitchen. My father sounded frustrated. "You should never have mentioned those things to Clara." My mother answered through tears. "She's already noticing the truth." Truth. The word stopped me cold. Then my father quietly whispered something that made my blood run cold completely. "If Clara starts asking the same questions your sister asked before disappearing, we'll lose another daughter." The moment my father said those words, my entire body froze halfway down the staircase. Lose another daughter. Another. Not the first. The farmhouse suddenly felt colder around me. Because deep down, I realized my aunt did not simply leave Amish country the way people always claimed. Something worse happened, and my parents had spent years hiding the truth from me. I stayed completely still while their voices continued softly inside the kitchen. My mother sounded exhausted. "She deserves to know what happened to Sarah." Sarah. So that was my aunt's name. My father answered immediately. "No. Knowing the truth will only fill her mind with rebellion." Rebellion. That word followed Amish girls everywhere. Questions became rebellion. Fear became rebellion. Wanting choices became rebellion. Then my mother whispered something that shattered me. Sarah wasn't rebellious. The room went silent. And honestly, the sadness in my mother's voice terrified me more than anything else. "She was frightened," my mother whispered softly. "There's a difference." My chest tightened painfully hearing that. Because suddenly, I understood my aunt in a way I never expected. Not as a shameful story. Not as a warning. As a girl. A real frightened girl. Then my father spoke again quietly. "If the church hears us discussing Sarah after all these years..." He stopped before finishing. But he did not need to finish. Fear already filled the room completely. Then I heard a chair scrape softly against the floor. Panic rushed through me instantly. I hurried quietly back upstairs before either parent could discover me listening. But sleep never came afterward. I spent hours staring into darkness, replaying every sentence inside my head. Sarah, marriage, fear, disappearing. And the most terrifying part was this. Deep down, I already knew the secret somehow. I simply never allowed myself to fully see it before. The next morning, everything inside the farmhouse felt painfully normal. My father read scripture during breakfast. My younger brothers argued about chores. My mother cooked quietly near the stove. Nobody mentioned Sarah. Nobody mentioned the argument. That silence somehow felt worse now. Because suddenly, I noticed how carefully Amish families buried uncomfortable truths beneath routine. Then later that afternoon, while cleaning old storage shelves upstairs, I accidentally discovered something hidden behind folded winter blankets inside an old wooden trunk. Letters. Dozens of them. Tied carefully with faded ribbon. My heart immediately started pounding. Because written across the top envelope was one name. Sarah Whitmore. My hands shook while opening the first letter carefully. The paper looked old and worn from years hidden away. And the first sentence made my blood run cold instantly. I thought marriage would finally make everyone proud of me. The sadness inside those words hurt immediately. I kept reading breathlessly. At first, the letters sounded hopeful. Sarah described wedding preparations, family expectations, trying to become the perfect Amish wife. But slowly, everything changed. The letters became darker, lonelier, fearful. Then suddenly I read a sentence that shattered me completely. Nobody warns Amish daughters how quickly obedience can become silence. My stomach twisted painfully, because deep down, I already understood exactly what she meant. I continued reading. Sarah wrote about apologizing constantly after marriage, about feeling nervous whenever her husband entered the room, about church women telling her patience mattered more than happiness. Then one line made tears rise instantly in my eyes. Sometimes I feel more like property than a person. The attic suddenly felt impossible to breathe inside, because this was not rebellion. This was suffering, real suffering. Then I heard footsteps downstairs. Panic exploded through me. I quickly hid the letters beneath my dress seconds before my mother entered the attic carrying folded sheets. The moment she saw my face, she knew immediately. You found them. Not anger, fear. Real fear. I slowly pulled the letters back out. Who was Sarah really? My mother's eyes instantly filled with tears. For several long seconds, she could not answer. Then softly, She was my younger sister. The pain in her voice broke me immediately. What happened to her? My mother sat heavily onto an old chair near the attic wall before answering. She married a respected Amish man when she was 18. Respected, another dangerous word. Church people always used it before terrible stories. At first, everyone called them the perfect couple, my mother whispered. But after the wedding, Sarah changed. Changed. Again, that word. Not happier, not loved. Changed. My mother wiped tears from her face shakily. She stopped singing while cooking. She stopped visiting family. She became afraid of speaking openly. The attic went painfully quiet. Then softly, I asked the question terrifying me most. Did her husband hurt her? My mother looked down immediately, and that silence answered before words did. Finally, she nodded once. Cold anger rushed through my chest instantly. Did nobody help her? The pain crossing my mother's face shattered me completely. She begged church leaders for help. Hope briefly entered my chest, until my mother whispered the next sentence. They told her becoming more obedient would fix the marriage. I stopped breathing, because suddenly, everything inside Amish life looked different. The silence, the fear, the obedience. It was never only about religion, it protected men too. Then my mother grabbed one of Sarah's letters with trembling hands and quietly read aloud the final sentence Sarah ever wrote before disappearing. If daughters truly understood marriage beforehand, many of us would run before the wedding day ever arrived. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. Then suddenly, heavy buggy wheels stopped outside the farmhouse. My mother's face lost all color immediately. Fear exploded through my chest. Who is it? My mother slowly stood and looked toward the attic window, and the moment she saw who climbed down from the buggy, she whispered something that made my blood run cold completely. It's Bishop Abram, and he brought a young man with him. The attic suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. My mother stood frozen near the window while the color drained completely from her face. Below us, Bishop Abram stepped out of the buggy, calmly adjusting his black coat. Beside him stood a tall Amish man I had never seen before. Young, broad shoulders, serious expression. And the moment I saw the way he looked toward our farmhouse, cold fear spread through my chest instantly. I already knew why he came. Marriage, not introduction, not friendship, arrangement. My mother grabbed Sarah's letters from my hands quickly. You cannot let them see these. Her voice shook badly now. I stared toward the window again. The young man looked older than me by several years. Maybe 26, maybe more. Exactly the kind of man church leaders praised constantly. Stable, quiet, obedient. The same kind of man Sarah probably married too. My stomach twisted painfully. Then downstairs, the farmhouse door opened. My father's voice greeted them nervously. Everything inside me suddenly screamed to run. But where could Amish girls run? Most of us were never taught how to survive outside church life. That was part of the trap too. Then my mother whispered something unexpected. You should stay upstairs. What? If Bishop Abram believes you're becoming difficult. She stopped speaking before finishing. But honestly, I already understood. Difficult girls lost choices quickly. Then footsteps entered the staircase below. Fear exploded inside my chest instantly. My mother shoved the letters back inside the wooden trunk, seconds before the attic door opened. My father appeared first. Behind him, Bishop Abram. The bishop smiled politely the moment he saw me, but something about his eyes felt careful, watchful. And suddenly, I realized church leaders probably watched girls long before girls understood it themselves. Clara, Bishop Abram said softly, you've grown into a fine young woman. The compliment made my skin crawl strangely, because deep down, it didn't feel personal. It felt evaluative, like someone inspecting livestock before purchase. Then the young Amish man stepped into view behind him. This is Daniel, the bishop continued calmly. His family owns farmland near Ohio. Daniel nodded politely toward me. I forced a weak smile back, but panic already tightened around my chest. Because suddenly, Sarah's letters felt less like history and more like warning. The bishop looked around the attic slowly before speaking again. Your father tells me you've become thoughtful lately. Thoughtful? Another dangerous Amish word. It usually meant a girl started asking questions adults disliked. My father avoided eye contact beside the doorway. Then Bishop Abram folded his hands calmly. Girls your age often become emotionally confused before marriage. Marriage again? Everything always returned to marriage. Like Amish daughters were raised toward one destination only. I swallowed hard carefully. I'm not confused. The bishop smiled slightly. That's exactly what concerned parents usually hear first. The room became painfully quiet afterward. Then Daniel finally spoke for the first time. You enjoy reading? The question surprised me. Most Amish men barely asked girls personal things directly. A little, I answered cautiously. Daniel nodded once. My mother says educated girls become restless wives. The sentence landed heavily inside my chest, because suddenly, I heard Sarah's voice inside the letters again. Nobody warns daughters how quickly obedience becomes silence. Then Bishop Abram looked directly toward my mother. You should bring supper downstairs. Daniel's family hopes for proper conversation tonight. Proper conversation. Everyone already acted like courtship discussions were decided. And suddenly, I realized the most terrifying part of Amish marriage. Girls often entered life-changing relationships long before understanding they had real choice. Later that evening, supper felt unbearable. Daniel sat beside my father discussing farming, church expectations, and family structure while I quietly passed dishes around the table. Nobody asked what I wanted. Nobody asked if I even liked him. At one point, Daniel calmly said something that made cold fear move through my body instantly. A peaceful wife creates peace inside a home. Peaceful. Another Amish word girls learned to fear, because peaceful usually meant quiet, obedient, easy to control. Then Bishop Abram looked toward me. Clara's mother says she's very emotional lately. My stomach tightened painfully. I looked toward my mother in shock. Tears instantly filled her eyes, because she never actually said that. The bishop was creating a story about me right in front of everyone, and nobody challenged him. Then Daniel softly smiled. Marriage settles emotional girls quickly. The room suddenly felt impossible to breathe inside, because at that exact moment, I understood the truth Sarah tried warning me about. Amish daughters were not only expected to marry, some were quietly handed toward men chosen specifically to silence them. Then suddenly, while reaching for bread near the center of the table, Daniel's sleeve pulled back slightly. And the second I saw the dark bruises covering his wife's wedding ring finger, my blood ran cold, because Daniel had already been married once before too. The moment I saw the pale mark beneath Daniel's wedding ring finger, my stomach twisted violently. Not a simple tan line, a scar, deep, old, like someone once tried ripping the ring from his hand. Fear moved slowly through my chest while the rest of the supper conversation continued around me. Nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe they already knew and chose silence. That possibility terrified me more. I forced myself to keep eating while my mind raced wildly. Another marriage, another dead or missing wife, another respected Amish man. And suddenly, Sarah's letters no longer felt like old warnings. They felt alive, dangerously alive. Then Bishop Abram casually smiled toward Daniel. You should tell Clara about your farm. Daniel nodded calmly. My wife and I managed nearly 40 acres together before her passing. My chest tightened instantly. Passing. Such a gentle word for something hiding pain underneath. I looked down at my plate carefully. What happened to her? The silence that followed felt painfully sharp. Daniel's expression changed only slightly, but enough. Childbirth complications, he answered calmly. Exactly the same answer church communities always gave. Clean. Short. Impossible to question politely. But suddenly, I remembered something horrifying. Sarah's letters mentioned another girl years earlier, a woman who became sick shortly after marriage too. Cold fear crawled across my skin. Then Daniel quietly added something that made my blood run colder. She struggled emotionally before the end. Emotionally. Again, every suffering woman somehow became emotional instead of wounded. Bishop Abram slowly nodded beside him. A husband carries heavy burdens when wives resist peace. Resist peace. The sentence sounded cruel disguised as wisdom. And suddenly, I understood the real secret they hid from Amish daughters. Women's pain became their own fault, eventually. Always. Then my father finally spoke softly. Clara is still young. Hope briefly entered my chest. Until Bishop Abram answered calmly, that is why guidance must happen before rebellion fully forms. Rebellion. That word again. The church already viewed curiosity as danger, questions as warning signs, fear as disobedience. Then Daniel looked directly toward me for the first time all evening, and quietly asked, Do you believe wives should obey husbands fully? My heartbeat became painful instantly. The room fell silent, waiting for my answer. I looked toward my mother desperately. Tears already filled her eyes. Because deep down, she knew exactly what kind of trap this was. If I answered honestly, The church would label me difficult. If I lied, I would become exactly the kind of silent daughter Sarah warned me about. Finally, I whispered carefully, "I think respect should go both ways." The silence afterward felt deadly. Bishop Abram's expression hardened immediately. Daniel stared at me without blinking. And suddenly, I knew I answered incorrectly. Then softly, Daniel leaned back in his chair. My first wife believed similar things. The room went cold around me. My father looked uncomfortable instantly. My mother stopped breathing entirely. And somehow, I already understood what Daniel meant before he finished speaking. She became harder to guide after marriage. Guide, not love, not understand. Guide, the exact same language Sarah described inside her letters. Control disguised as leadership. Then Daniel slowly rolled his wedding ring between his fingers and added quietly, "Women suffer most when they mistake independence for strength." The sentence made fear explode through my body, because suddenly, I understood exactly what kind of man sat beside me. Not loud, not wild, careful, controlled. The most dangerous kind sometimes. Then unexpectedly, my mother stood from the table so suddenly her chair scraped loudly across the floor. Everyone looked toward her in shock. Her hands shook badly. "She's not ready for marriage." The room went completely silent, because Amish wives almost never interrupted church discussions between men. Bishop Abram stared at her carefully. Fear before courtship is normal. My mother shook her head immediately. "No, you don't understand." Tears streamed down her face now. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I saw my mother stop being afraid of the church. She already knows what happened to Sarah. The entire room froze. My father closed his eyes instantly. Daniel looked confused. But Bishop Abram looked terrified. Real fear, because suddenly, the secret daughters were never supposed to learn had entered the room openly. Then my mother whispered something broken through tears that shattered the silence forever. Sarah didn't disappear because she hated Amish life. Her voice cracked completely. She disappeared because nobody saved her after marriage destroyed her. The silence afterward felt crushing. Then slowly, Bishop Abram stood from the table and quietly said something that made my blood run cold completely. "Some truths destroy daughters faster than silence ever could."